Welcome to Film at 50, a podcast that celebrates semi-centennials in the world of cinema. I'm your host, Brian Rowe, and I'm very excited to welcome Jacob Throneberry to the podcast today to talk about Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, the fourth installment of the original series of 5 films. How are we doing, Jacob?
Good. How are you? I'm very happy that you asked me to be on. Um, I haven't seen any of the other ones, so it was kind of interesting watching it out of context, but I paired it with how I thought the new trilogy would have
Okay.
taken it and how it would have fit in there. So we'll
Yeah.
talk about that later. And yeah, I'm just happy to be on. I'm happy to see the movie, and it was interesting. I feel like there's a little bit to talk about.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Yeah, that was my initial question. I was curious how many of them you've seen, because there are kind of 2 stages. There's the original 5 films that goes from, I think, 68 to 73, 5 films made very quickly, one after the other kind of a thing. And then there's a long stretch. I think there were maybe a TV series or 2, but there was a stretch of very little. And then Tim Burton made his film Planet of the Apes with Mark Wahlberg in 2001. That was kind of like a separate thing, like a standalone. And then we got the trilogy of the previous decade, which was just, I thought, spectacular, and just
Unbelievable.
did the series justice. And like a couple of those films showed up on my top 10 of the year list. Like I really love what especially Matt Reeves did. And so it's really interesting to kind of compare what Matt Reeves did with the last 2 and then see what they did in the first 5. But watching Conquest for the first time in many years, I had seen the first 3 a lot when I was younger. 4 and 5, for whatever reason, I haven't seen that much. I've maybe seen Conquest once, like many years ago. And boy, is this movie dark.
Yeah.
Yeah,
very much so. Very, very metaphorical, very dark. That's something I wasn't, because like I said, my initial knowing of the Planet of the Apes was the most recent trilogy. I remember I was in high school when all those came out.
Okay.
And
dating myself.
I remember those were the ones that I went, and they were the first times I really went to go see the Planet of the Apes, because Planet of the Apes, something you hear about, the concept, the idea, but like I had never seen the originals. I'd never seen the Tim Burton ones. I'd seen, clips that make the rounds, especially from the Tim Burton ones. But yeah, I'd never seen those. So I was expecting a similar story-esque to like the new trilogy. And I was like, it has those essences, but it is a lot darker. Like it goes much deeper into the kind of essence of the Planet of the Apes.
Yeah, I would say this 4th installment of the original series of 5 films, easily the darkest of the 5. There are some dark elements to the first 3. It's like the third one, the last 20 minutes, it gets really scary and really depressing and dark for sure, but it also has a lot of lightness throughout, and that's not the case here, really. There's almost no humor or lightness in Conquest.
No, not at all. How it seemed to me was, it seemed like, and again, because I haven't seen any of the other ones, I might bounce it back and forth with this trilogy. It seems like, and funny enough, this being the 4th one, I don't know how the first 3 go, but this seems like it would go in between the first and the second film of the new trilogy, where the idea of, their first kind of rise up, you kind of saw it at the end of the first trilogy and then leading into it. But I feel like this would have been the melding point from the first movie to the second movie, before they really start their rise into their planet. And so that's where I was trying to put it, in between the new one.
But so had you not seen the original, the very first one from 68, Planet of the Apes? Oh, okay.
Not
interesting.
Yet. No.
I feel
I've been meaning to. I just hadn't seen it, not to this point yet.
Okay. Has watching Conquest, did that inspire you at all to maybe go back and see at least the original?
If anything, it inspires me to go back and try to put together what I was watching. Because now I have all this knowledge of the 4th one, which not to say the 4th one's a bad movie, but it feels like the 4th one might be the most contained out of the 5. it feels like the fourth is like, it felt almost like a episode, like a TV
Oh
episode of
yeah,
like a bigger story. And
extended
so I
episode.
really want to kind of put that story together, like
Mhm.
it's, that kind of thing. So it does make me want to go back and revisit the first trilogy and then see the fifth and kind of get all of those thrown together.
Yeah, the one I really don't remember much of is the fifth one. I think it's called
Mhm.
Battle for the Planet of the Apes. I feel like that's probably the least of the five. I
Mhm.
remember it has a nice finality to the initial five movies, but it's probably just content wise not as interesting as the first four. But it's funny that you said, because I wrote down in my notes, one of the things I wrote was, I feel like if you were to walk into this one cold, not having seen the first three, you'd be kind of lost. Was that the case? Like, were you kind of? I mean, they talk about the third film a lot. Like
Mhm.
Ricardo Montalban's character, there's at least three scenes where they're talking about things that happened in the third film, Escape. And I'm like, if you just put this one on, not having seen the first three, did that bother you at all, or could you still follow it? Okay.
I could still follow it, and like I was saying earlier, it's still very metaphorical into the
Yeah.
time of the late 60s, early 70s,
Mm-hmm.
and into the whole like civil rights movement of that
Right.
time. It was very on the nose with that, not in a bad way, but
Yeah.
I was able to pick up on that. And the only things I couldn't get, the government, I was like, okay, I guess this is just some governmental force that had been kind of doing this. The man who was with Caesar, I don't know if they ever actually said his name.
Mm.
The man who was with Caesar at the beginning of the movie, I don't know if they ever actually said his name. They did say that he worked at a circus.
Yeah.
Um,
He's in the third one.
they
Ricardo
did,
Montalban.
yeah, they did. And I
His
liked
name.
that they kind of explained how, even though he was saying it as a way to like deflect whatever the people were accusing him of, I liked how they kind of explained um, how he came in possession of Caesar. I assume that that's how it happened, that the two talking apes that came from outer space
Mm-hmm.
had a kid, and then that
Yeah.
kid got switched with the kid from the circus, and the kid from the circus is the one that ultimately died, that they ultimately killed, and then Caesar was the one who stayed in the circus with
Yes. Mm-hmm.
whoever. I
Yeah. So
Interesting
his
name.
name's Armando. that's
Okay,
that's the character's name.
okay, easiest way to say it. And so yeah, so that is kind of what I was able to pick up on the
Mm-hmm.
third movie, was that
Yeah.
the two talking apes, I assume that they've already passed.
Yeah. It's
Um,
hard to talk about them at all and not give away spoilers if you want to watch
oh
the
no,
first
no,
three.
they're 60 years old. Just speak freely about them if you want.
Yeah.
Because like I said, I don't know. So if I'm saying something wrong, or if you have anything to share,
Like
yeah. If
like I
anyone's upset about spoilers, I mean, you've
Oh no no
had
no! I just mean
plenty of
for
years.
you. I just mean for
Oh
you.
no, yeah.
If you want to go back and see the first three, I don't want to just sit here and tell you everything that happens in the
Oh no,
first
go for
three.
it. Go for it. No,
But
honestly, like
yeah, but you got that right on the nose. Like in terms of the third movie, so basically the Earth is about to end, and two of the apes or three of the apes manage to escape. In the third film, they land on Earth, but they've gone forward in time to the
okay.
early 1970s. And so in the third film, it's like everyone's normal, early 70s, but then we have these apes that are like trying to fit in with society. They can talk, and but then there's those people who are like, we don't want the apes taking over. Like we
Mhm.
we, we want to keep them to the side. So like the villain of movie three decides we're gonna put them down, and we do not want them reproducing. That's not good. And so they think they killed the child at the end, but they actually killed the wrong
Mhm.
ape child, and because the mom Zira switched at the circus. They were at the circus for like 10 minutes, 15 minutes towards the end of the movie, and she
Mhm.
switched her child with the other ape who cannot talk. And so in the very end of movie three, we realize, oh, their son is not dead. He's in the circus with Ricardo Montalban, and that's where the third movie ends. And so now many years have passed, and now Caesar is now an adult. Caesar, the name we also get in the new trilogy,
Yes.
the later trilogy. There's a lot of like, it's not like they just went an entirely new direction in the trilogy from the last decade. Like there are a lot of similarities and touches that call back to the original series of the 5 films, which I really love too.
Okay, yeah. So I do like that this fourth film was able to enlighten me on that one. Because it seems like everything that I was picked up from the movie was how it ended up being.
But it really is a self-contained. I mean, I feel like, I guess if I were to go into one cold, in some ways, I guess it's easier to navigate the fourth film versus 2 and 3. Like 2 like starts off directly after the first one, and then 3 starts pretty much directly after the second one, and you really have to kind of know what's going on. I feel like the fourth one, it jumps forward in time, and even if you don't know everything about the first 3, there is this sense like that it's like a complete story in and of itself, and you can kind of follow it, and you kind of figure out just based on the behavior and the character interactions, like where we are, how this is a science fiction story, and who Caesar is and why he's a threat, and I feel like you can follow it okay.
Yeah, and I think that jumping forward, because I remember because I noticed that all of the pets are killed, which I that's one thing I didn't know
like that.
how or why that happened. I didn't know if that was something that was alluded to in the first couple movies, but
not that I remember.
Okay, so just
that was like,
a decision. Because under that little dog statue, I noticed it was 1983.
Yeah.
So I think that jump forward in time probably helped it be self-contained because it's so far removed from the rest of the bunch. So it's not like, it seems almost like, again, going back to the TV things, like the first three tell their own story, and then 4 and 5, depending on however 5 is, tells like its finalization of that story. And so so I do think, like you were saying, it is very self-contained, and it was the perfect one for me to watch as someone who has never watched them, because I was able to watch this movie as its own rather than watch it as part of a quintilogy. I don't know how you would.
Yeah, I mean, I think the perfect one to watch would be the first one. I think that's the best of the first 5. It is like just it has Charlton Heston in the lead role, like big movie star of the time, and it's just like the most compelling story from beginning to end, I think, is the first one. But yeah, as I said, I think if you haven't seen the first 3, this wasn't a bad one to start with, and I hope it inspires you to go back, at least watch the first one. It's really good.
Absolutely.
Before we get into more of our thoughts about this film, I'd love for you to just share kind of what role has film played in your life, and if you have a few all-time favorites you could share with us, that would be awesome.
So I really got into film a lot freshman year of college.
Okay.
I had the same kind of moving away from home issues that every other, person who goes off to college has. I went to a school where I didn't know anybody. I was hours and hours and hours away from home. It was a smaller school, so there wasn't like this huge population of people to go to. And so, in my downtime, that's when I really started getting into watching movies. And I'd always liked movies growing up. I remember my parents they wouldn't let me go to the theaters to see the Lord of the Rings, but they would always buy them on DVD so that the day they were released, I could watch them at home. And I remember coming home watching that. Love the Harry Potter movies. Spider-Man, if you can't tell from, you probably can't see it right now.
You have Spider-Man poster?
Yeah, everywhere. I've always been a fan of movies, but it was freshman year of college where I really expanded from the generic, boy movies of growing up to, really expansive and can't think of the word, like really just getting into cinema as a whole.
Yeah, going beyond like the big titles and kind of seeing all the different genres and smaller indie films, that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I remember, as you know, being on Twitter, I know you are. I'm very big into the Oscar season, awards, everything like that. I remember the first awards race that I actually like followed from start to finish was the 2015/2016 one when Spotlight won the Best
Okay.
Picture, all of that. I was a big fan. I saw Room, and I had always been a fan of Brie Larson just in general.
Mm-hmm.
But Room just blew me away, and her
Yeah.
performance blew me away. And that was the first time I personally remember being like, oh, she should win an award for this.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah.
that was the first time that I really like followed, because everybody who, whether they follow awards or whether they're just watch movies, they always say like, oh, they should win an award for this. But that was the first time I had ever said that and followed through, like all the way until the Oscars. That was the first Oscars I really watched. And I remember watching that Oscars and seeing all these different movies that I had never heard of start winning awards and stuff like that. And it really got me to start investing more into the show as a whole. I remember the day of the Oscars, I was driving back from Nashville, Tennessee, to where I was going to school up near Cincinnati. And I was driving back to school. It was about 4 hours. And on my way back, the Oscars had already started. So I like placed my phone up on the dashboard a little bit and had a stream of the Oscars showing. And I remember I got to my apartment or to my dorm, ran inside, jumped on my bed, and then set up the TV to have the Oscars playing super quick, right in time to see Brie Larson win. And it was
good. Okay.
perfect moment. And it really like encapsulated that whole season for me. Then I remember Spotlight, when Spotlight won,
kind of
at
a
the
surprise.
time, I'd grown up Christian. I had never grown up Catholic. I went to a Catholic school. I played football my freshman year of college. I was recruited to a Catholic school up in, near Cincinnati. And so I was at a Catholic school. And so this was my first experience really taking in all of this stuff. And I know you said you were a teacher. My path throughout most of college until, my super senior year was to be a teacher. And at a Catholic school, you have to take classes regarding a lot of the instances that happened in Spotlight. All those, I'm not going to get too far into details, but I think you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So we had to take classes regarding that, and we had to like make sure that people understood like the boundaries and everything like that, just because there was such a stigma around, Catholics and everything like that. So I remember being in that class, and really that kind of propelled me to watch the movie just to learn more. And then I started getting more into history. I went into school and I was undecided. I was a business major because I was like, that'd be one of the easiest things I can do and just, get away with it. I started getting more into history, and I started getting more into history when I started getting more into film.
Okay.
And I was able to use, and I'm not saying this for everyone out there because not every film is the perfect historical representation, but I was able to, use film to kind of learn about these things I'd never learned about. And so that throughout my years of college, just kind of really honing in on those, touching on those. And then through history, I found a love of writing. I'd always loved writing. When I was younger, I used to make up stories for my classes and stuff like that. I used to love writing. It was one of those things where I loved writing, but I never knew what I loved writing about. I loved writing stories. I loved writing little, tales or whatnot, but I'd never finished anything. And so it was finally that moment where I was like, this is what I love writing about. And so, years later, I start taking actual film classes. I end up getting my minor in film, and here we are now. I've been doing this for a couple of years, just working, trying to build a reputation and get my name out there. And hopefully it seems like it's you asked me to come on, so it seems like it's doing something. But yeah, that's kind of my like film journey,
That's so cool.
as you would put.
That's fantastic. Thanks for sharing that with us.
But yeah, so I know it's a super long-winded answer for probably an easy question, but that's kind of the journey that I've taken through film. And then through that, through all my film classes, I took a world cinema class where I found out so much more international cinema, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I took, I graduated a history major, so I wasn't a film major, but I was a film minor, which for the school I went to meant you did film studies. So it was really about the study of the history of film. And so it got me really into watching stuff like this and watching stuff that, really meant something, like not as film, but as like meant something as art and meant something as kind of a movement and stuff like that. And so so that's
so
pretty
cool.
much it.
Have you seen a lot of films from the 1970s, which is kind of the decade that we're
my favorite decade? It's the 1970s in general is my favorite decade. Anything 1970s I am all for.
Like the music and things like that.
Yeah, music. Most of my Spotify playlists are 1970s like hits, 1970s classics, like stuff like that.
That's the best.
All of the licorice pizza debate aside, I loved just the aura that he built with the 70s and just everything. I just love just living in that moment. One of my favorite movies this year was Apollo 10.5, because it's basically
I haven't seen that yet. I want to watch that.
It's basically just like, it's just nostalgia in the summer of 1969. And it's just basically what it was like growing up in the summer of 1969. And it's narrated by Jack Black. So you can't really miss too much.
His School of Rock star. That's so cool. Yeah. So the 70s is an interesting time for film, especially the early half of the decade. You don't really see very many sequels or franchises. I mean, I'd say around this time, the two main ones are the James Bond series, which by now we're moving into the Roger Moore era, starting with Live and Let Die in 73. And then there's the Planet of the Apes films, which is like one a year for a while here. But for the most part, there's some big films, big budget spectacle movies here and there, but it's mostly like smaller movies, not based on any IP or any franchises or anything. It's like original films, like almost everything we talk about on here. And that's definitely not the case today of where film is, especially as we get closer to summer, right?
It's super exciting. And that's another reason I love the 70s, because the 70s is one of the last kind of decades where you just saw people just spitting out movies. I mean, Sidney Lumet is one of my favorite directors ever, and I think he had like 7 movies released in the 1970s.
At least.
And it's just people just kept making movies, and they kept releasing like high quality movies. And you've got people nowadays. Damien Chazelle will release one every couple of years. Jordan Peele has released one like every 2-3 years. Same with Ari Aster and all that kind of stuff. But it seems like there's a lot more that goes into making films nowadays, where it's like then it was you just kind of made it and it was good and you released it and then you just moved on to your next one. Now you've got all the press and all the press tours, all the distribution, all that. And then you've got award season on top of that, which means so much. And it seems like the 1970s were one of the last decades where it was like you just make a soul movie that you can release out to the world.
Hope it makes money.
And hope it makes money. And if it doesn't make money, you're already moving on to your next movie. And so so I think that's one of the coolest things for me. And it's one of my favorite, the 1970, I think 77, it would be the 77 Oscars because it was 76 movies. That's one of my favorite, Academy Awards in general. Peter Finch's win for Network was incredible. Letting his wife come up on stage and speak was unbelievable. The first indie movie to ever win Best Picture, won that year in Rocky, which beat, I mean, classics movies.
All the
One
President's
flew,
Men.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got just a couple of years before, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's
Mm-hmm.
Nest,
Year before.
went 5 for 5. I just think that there's just so much great stuff
Yeah.
that was kind of like thrown into that. And it's like you said, it was one of the last decades without um it was one of the last decades without big franchises,
Yeah.
because
Mm-hmm.
when you started, you saw the first Star Wars in the 70s, but when you started in the 80s, you had the Rocky franchise really get started.
Mm-hmm.
You had the Indiana Jones franchise really get started. You had the James Bond still kicking and still
Going strong.
making its way. You got I already said the Alien franchise going. I mean, like, this was one of the last kind of decades where it was like you said, you made a movie and you moved on to the next one.
Yeah,
And
well,
I think
until
there's something so cool
Jaws.
about that.
Yeah. Until Jaws in 75, I don't know if there's any movie that's necessarily making so much money that they're like, we need a sequel right away.
Mm-hmm.
Like, some movies did well, but there wasn't that mentality in 1972. Like, if a movie did well, like, sequel, green light the sequel, that would come later. I mean, you have
Yeah.
a film like The Godfather, which came out in early 72, and then that gets a sequel that comes out at the end of 74. But that's
Mm-hmm.
that's a specific kind of sequel. I mean, I know they greenlit a second one because they thought it would make money, but there was also a story to tell, and Coppola wanted to come do it. And so I feel like that's almost kind of different. In the rare instance of like these Planet of the Apes movies, as we get back into Conquest, like,
Mm-hmm.
these movies were made for money, really. By the third film, like, they were being made not because they had this grand story to tell over 3 more films. It was like, these films make a lot of money, let's make another one. And that's kind of a rare instance of a franchise kind of mentality thinking of the time, because each of the sequels they cost less money because
Yeah.
the return on each sequel was a little bit less. They weren't like going up or anything like some sequels do now. Like, the third film made less than the second one, and then the fourth one made less than the third. And I think by the fifth one, I think people were like, yeah, I think let's move on.
Well, I have a question for you as
Yeah.
someone who has seen all of them. Do you think that was just because this is, a sci-fi movie, and it's got the effects, it's got the costuming, it's got all that kind of stuff. Do you think that's why, or do you think it was just kind of more like a story-based thing? People really like latched onto the story itself, or do you think it was more of like not Cats, but the same idea of Cats, of like, oh, this is going to make a lot of money because you have to come and like witness what it actually is?
Well, the first film came out in 68, and I don't think there was ever any intention that this would be a series. Like, I think it was a one-off, and then it did very well, and people really enjoyed the first one. And they were able to woo Charlton Heston back for a small part in the sequel. And the sequel ends with Charlton Heston blowing up the world. So the second one ends like, that's it. Like, there doesn't seem to, there's not this thinking of like, oh, well, there's clearly going to be 3 more. But I think there was like, the second one did well, I think better than they expected. And they said, I think we might have one more story. And they came up with a great one for Escape. And then that film did well, not quite as good, but still well. And there's clearly like they could understand that like younger audiences were really into these movies, Planet of the Apes movies. And so they just kept churning one out a year for 2 more years. And they had enough story to at least get us through the 4th one. I think by the 5th one, it's starting to feel a little bit tired. But watching this film again last night, I was like, this is really cool and different. And I don't even know if you could have made Conquest the year that the first one came out in 68, because like the MPA rating system was barely even in existence yet. Like, you still had some rules, like things you could show and not show. And I don't know, like I have the Blu-ray of Conquest, and it has the unrated cut, and that's what I watched last night. So I don't know how I didn't have a chance to look at the theatrical cut again and see what the differences are, but it's really gory at the end of the unrated cut.
Oh, really?
And it's like, whoa, like this would not have, I'm like, I think this would have gotten an R rating. And I think that's why they had to cut it down, which they did for the theatrical cut, to get a PG. because movies 1, 2, 3, and 5 are rated G. They are G rated. But Conquest barely got through with a PG. That's how much more violent this one is than
Oh
the other
wow.
4, which is really interesting.
Do you know the runtime of the unrated version? Is it the
I
same as the theatrical version?
The theatrical you watched, was that like
It
88
was at
minutes,
like
something like that?
yeah, like 120-ish.
Yeah. So I started it. Yeah, it was about an hour and 34, hour and 35,
Okay.
something like that. It might have had like 5 extra minutes of material. Like the ending riot goes on a long time.
Okay.
And I'm
Yeah,
like, I
see,
don't think all of this is in the theatrical cut.
you said that and I just remember because I just finished watching it and I was like I remember the riot scene, but I don't remember anything that I wish I would have watched that one.
I
That would
mean,
have been
so
more.
there are parts of the unrated cut where apes are shot like in the face and like blood explodes all over the
Oh
face. Was that
wow.
in the cut you watched at all?
Not
There's like 3
any.
shots of blood
I
like
mean, there
splattering over ape's face.
I saw apes get shot, but it was more like the old school of like, oh, you
Yeah.
get shot and then you just kind of fall over. I didn't see any like, not that I can remember. So that's interesting.
So I don't know how much that exists like on streaming, or if you go like
Mhm.
buy this somewhere on like on Amazon or something. But if you get the Blu-ray collection of the first 5 films, Conquest does come with the unrated cut, which was really neat to watch. I love that stuff. I love like a 50-year-old
Yeah.
movie, and there's even that option like to actually not just see the clips, but actually watch it in full with the extra scenes. I always really like that. You don't get to see
Mhm.
that very much, especially for older films. But as we get deeper into the movie, let me just, for our listeners who might not have seen it. So, in this third sequel, the apes turn the tables on the human Earth population when they lead a revolt against their cruel masters. It is the distant year of 1990. So, the third film was set like the same year as its release, so like 71 ish. This fourth film is set far in advance from when this came out in 72. This is set in the year 1990. By doing this, it creates a time loop that leads to the first film. The idea was, at least at the time, was that Conquest was going to be the last of the 4 films. Like this was going to be it. And so the
Mhm.
screenwriter, Paul Den, like he actually was informed, like this is probably going to be the last one. Can you end it in a way where it kind of ties back into the beginning of Planet of the Apes from 68? So at the beginning of Planet of the Apes, you learn that when Charlton Heston lands and in his spaceship, and he's like, oh, like this is a world of apes who are smart and who can talk, and humans are dumb, cannot talk, and they are kind of like the lesser of the the population. And
Mhm.
so the ending of Conquest kind of shows you how that society begins on this night with this riot, is where that starts, with Caesar kind of being the leader. And so if there was no 5th film battle, I think this would be a nice segue into the first film. The same way that the end of War, the Matt Reeves third film, kind of leads back to the beginning of
Mhm.
the series too.
Yeah, no, I agree. That was one of my favorite things about the end of war,
Mm-hmm.
because in a sense that there was never in this trilogy, the newest trilogy, there was never a full, Planet of the Apes. Like the end of
Mm-hmm.
war is when the planet is fully developed. And I don't
Yeah.
know if they're going to go back and make more. I don't know their idea, but it ends so perfectly because it was like
Yeah.
the planet was started with this version of Caesar, and this version of Caesar
Mm-hmm.
um, led them through all these different things, led them into a giant war that's happening between everything, and then finally like led them into like their haven. And so that
Mm-hmm.
was one of my favorite things about that one is it tied back into the beginning, and it showed that the person who started it all was finally the person who ended it all.
Yep.
And so yeah, that was one of my favorite things about that one, and that makes me interested for how the 5th one
Yeah. I'm
goes
trying to
because
remember. It's in a forest. That's all I remember.
um oh, look, perfect segue from this being the middle of 1 and 2 with the new trilogy. The second trilogy is mostly in a forest too.
Yeah.
um but yeah, so it makes me wonder because I do think that this one had especially his speech at the end when he made that like almost like quick little change to be
Mm.
like, we're not going to be like Beast and stuff like that.
Mhm.
After I can't remember the character's name, whoever the
The villain.
yeah, the whoever the villain is,
Mhm.
when he was basically like,
Governor
which,
Breck.
okay, interesting. When he was basically like, let me see, how did he put this? He was basically like we made you into the pets because you guys are the beast that
Mm.
we want to like suppress
Right.
in ourselves.
Mhm.
And he kind of, after hearing that, he kind of made that flip, and he was like we're not going to be those beasts you think we are. We're just
Mm.
going to be um like we're going to like lead by more goodness in a
Mhm.
way. So I did think it was a good ending, and it was one of those kind of endings that could have been ambiguous, like, okay, this is how it is, because you see, you know, that's the city in the background is burning down and there's that fire there. And um you know, the governor's not dead. They decided not to kill them, and now they're just going to kind of go on with their life. And so I think, um I don't know how the fifth one is, but I do think that this one, like we were saying before, and like we're saying now, it is very self-contained, and
Mhm.
it is kind of its own movie.
Yeah, something I liked about Conquest is how claustrophobic it feels, and
Mm-hmm.
how it's very like the first three have a lot of different locations, and we're outside and then we're inside, and a lot of day scenes where Charlton Heston is running through all of these like wild sets and things. And
Mm-hmm.
that was definitely the case in the second one. You go like underneath the earth and you see all of this cool, crazy stuff. And then Escape is just basically set on Earth, like in LA in 71. This feels very much more like self-contained to this one place, probably in some respects to save on money, because if
Mm-hmm.
you're just shooting in one location the whole time, it's going to cost less. But it was shot at the University of California Irvine campus, which was 6 years old at the time. I'm assuming they shot in the summer when there weren't as many classes being held. I don't
I
know.
would I would
Like,
hope so.
like I feel like it'd be hard to shoot a movie like this like during the school year for college students.
Mm-hmm.
I would have
Yeah.
been an extra.
Yeah, no,
I'll be an
I
ape.
would have been first one there. But no, I think when I was going up with when I was in school up near Cincinnati, the only thing that was shooting around us was a some Lifetime movie. I can't even remember. Um, but yeah, it'd be interesting seeing someone who got up 20 minutes late for class and is in their pajamas, not fully dressed, just kind of running through the middle of
Yeah.
the set. Sorry, excuse me, like bags flying everywhere.
Or
Yeah.
imagine you roll out of bed and you're just kind of out of it and you're just like trying to get to class and you're walking down and you don't see the camera and you just see all of these apes like coming towards you.
Yeah.
You're like, what?
You just walk right back. That's what I was thinking. Like you're just lying in bed and you like turn over, like your alarm goes off and you look at your window and you see like apes running and people like shooting at them. You're
And they
like,
all have
well,
guns.
it's not today. That's today. You email your professor and you're like, so I don't know if I'm tripping, but I just saw some apes running and people were firing guns at them, and I'm probably not going to come in today.
You're calling like the emergency hotline of the campus. Can someone come check by my dorm building? Like there's some
Yeah.
adult sized apes outside my window with guns and they're shooting.
Oh,
Like, is everything
oh,
okay?
now they're talking. Don't know what happened.
And they
Don't know
can
what's going
speak.
on. Yeah.
In fact, one guy, I don't know. There's this series called Planet of the Apes. One of them even looks like the main guy from the last movie. That's also something interesting. So Roddy McDowall is the lead of Conquest. He's playing the adult Caesar. So
Mhm.
he played Cornelius in the first one. I can't remember why he's not in the second one. They had a different actor. And then he came back for the third one as Cornelius. He
And is that's the
dies,
dad
the
of?
dad of Caesar.
Okay.
He is shot to death by humans at the end of 3, and he dies. And then it's like, do we get someone else? No. Let's just get Roddy McDowall back again.
Yeah. I mean,
Like,
perfect. It's
it
if all
makes
they got to do
sense,
is put him in a costume, yeah.
you know.
Um, which
So
I
he
thought,
got to continue. He got to continue playing an ape for 2 more movies because now he plays Caesar and not Cornelius.
yeah, which I really loved. I thought he was one of the best parts of the movie. I thought he was able to do, because looking at that Caesar versus this Caesar with Andy Serkis, and just knowing like the advancements in technology, and it's like Andy Serkis could do anything he wanted. Andy Serkis was full body acting.
Mhm.
His mouth was moving, how Caesar's mouth was moving, everything. And it's like in this, it almost seemed like he was like in a suit just controlling a puppet. And he didn't have a lot to that he could work with, but I think he did a very good job going with it. I think his whole performance from start to bottom, really the only thing you see of him is his eyes. You know, you can't
Yeah.
even see his mouth in it. And so I think start to bottom, he gave a very spectacular performance, especially with his eyes, especially in the scenes when they're trying to get him to talk and they're electrocuting him.
Yeah.
And he's like, he's like, it looks like he's on the verge of tears, but you can't really tell, but you can kind of see that glisten in his eyes that he is like kind of hopeless at this moment, and he needs some escape. I thought he was very good in that. I don't know. I'd have to go actually look in and see all the things he's done in his career, but I thought this one was pretty fantastic.
Yeah, McDowell started as a child actor in the late 1930s, I want to say, and he acted all the way at least into the 90s. And he probably has more than 100 credits, maybe lots more than that on his IMDb. But probably one of the projects he's most famous for is the Planet of the Apes franchise. Like, even though we don't see Roddy McDowall in these films, we really, as you say, just see the eyes and the facial expressions. But he really made a stamp on these two characters and the series. And I think, and I'm sure Andy Serkis would agree, like what Roddy McDowall did probably served a lot of inspiration for Andy Serkis on the most recent trilogy. Because in the new trilogy, Serkis got to do anything he wanted versus Roddy McDowall, who was kind of constrained by the makeup and the physicality. He could only do so much back in 1972.
Yeah, it's like the difference between like Michael Keaton's Batman versus the Batman nowadays, where back then he was constrained to like
it's like this.
That had the neck constraints, couldn't turn his head, and it's nowadays people can, it's the suits made of spandex, and they can just move however they want. Better. So it's interesting. I wonder. I haven't ever looked into it, but I wonder if he took any inspiration from this as for his Caesar.
Yeah, I would be surprised if Andy Serkis was like, "Oh no, yeah, I never really watched the original the original series." I would be surprised. I mean, not to say that he was like taking notes and watching Roddy McDowall or anything, but I'm sure there was at least some awareness of what McDowall did in those first few films, and I'm sure that played at least a small role in what Serkis wanted to do with the character of Caesar in the new trilogy. But really cool. There are a lot of similarities between the new trilogy and the old franchise, even though they're separated by like 40 years. Like there are a lot, like if you watch them both, close to the same time, there are a lot of similarities. It's not just its own separate thing, which is really neat.
Yeah. I mean, you've got, for instance, you've got, even with Caesar, you've got Caesar, his parents were killed, baby switched, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Like you still kind of have that essence of, it seems like they definitely did their research in taking inspiration from the original. I don't know if you can answer this for me. Are these based off like book series or anything like that before? Or was this just like a full original idea, like brought to life in these movies?
So it's embarrassing to admit, I'm not 100%. I'm pretty sure the original film is based on a book.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure. And Rod Serling, the creator of The Twilight Zone, he co-wrote the screenplay. Or did he write it, the whole thing himself? I'm going to look it up real quick. Okay. Rod Serling he played a role in writing the screenplay for the first film. I don't think he wrote any of the sequels. But when we think Rod Serling, we think Twilight Zone, one of the most famous TV series of all time, which he wrote most of the scripts for. But a lot of people forget that he also played a big role in bringing Planet of the Apes to the screen. He wrote the script. So I'm just going to pull that up real quick. But yeah, so he's Roddy McDowall in this movie. I feel like he's taking the character in a slightly different direction than he was doing with Cornelius. Cornelius is a little bit goofier, a little bit more afraid, and that's not Caesar. Caesar has much more of a commanding presence, and he recognizes all the grief he's had to go through, not having his parents. He's got Ricardo Montalban as Armando. It's kind of his father figure that he's known his whole life. And then about halfway through Conquest, he dies. Not the way I remembered. I thought that they killed him, and not really. He just jumps out of a building.
I
like,
honestly,
oh my God.
I must have missed that because they mentioned something about him dying, and I was wondering if he was going to come back, and it was like, oh no, he actually just is dead. But yeah, I ended up getting it later on, but I did miss his actual death. I guess I was just looking away. I guess I just
it happens very fast.
Yeah,
I
must have.
Yeah, that scene
looked away for a second.
Yeah, that scene's great. So he thinks Ricardo Montalban's about to leave. They're like, okay, you're free to go, but they're like, before you leave, we want to do a quick lie detector test.
Okay, so I did see that.
They make him sign off that he's telling the truth, and they're like, but before you go, we just want to double check. We have a lie detector test, which is this like scary machine that comes down from the ceiling. And of course, it catches him lying. And I think they're about to arrest him again, or like they're getting rough with him. And he just like turns and jumps out the window. It's very abrupt. You don't see him land. You don't see anything. All of a sudden, through dialogue in the next scene, we learn that he's dead.
Okay.
Like that's how it's,
so that's why
that was kind of odd. Yeah, it's very quick.
I did see the lie detector scene because that's when they brought up. That's when I figured out a lot of why Caesar was with him and all that kind of stuff. That's when they talked about him being a part of the circus and everything. They brought out the pictures of Cornelius.
They talked about the
Caesar,
third film, yeah.
And that's when I got all that dialogue. But I must have just missed him turn and jump.
And real quick, so the first film it was co-written by Rod Serling and Michael Wilson, and it was based on a novel by Pierre Boulle.
Okay.
So it was based. I was like almost 100%. I was like, I think the first movie was based on a book. I have never read the book. I should. I've seen all these films and I love them so much. It would be interesting to see what the source material is like. What actually happened in the novel. Is it the same trajectory as the movie? Like maybe there's some differences. I don't know. But yeah,
so that is interesting.
But I think like all the sequels are just original stories. I don't think. I mean, maybe they're taking a little bit from parts of the original novel, but it's not like they had a series of books to pull from. Yeah, I think it was just the one book. But I think oh yeah, go for it.
I was gonna say like I think that's why I really enjoy the sequel trilogy. The most recent trilogy is because from what I've seen from Tim Burton's, it seems more like they just tried to follow this one where it's like I love this trilogy, even though it's not Matt Reeves. I call it the Matt Reeves trilogy.
Yeah, he didn't direct the Rise,
the first one,
yeah,
but he did the second two. That trilogy, I love that they kind of just were able to modernize it in a way that still worked and still paid homages to the characters and had Caesar be the main character, had all that still involved, and was able to make it into a story for today. So I think that that was interesting, seeing that kind of like, and especially that's why I'm really glad that I saw this one, knowing that Caesar's not in the first couple, and that he is his kind of rise to power is in this one. And so it was really nice seeing that rise to power from Caesar, and then knowing that that's the character of the new one. So now I can see like the similarities between that Caesar and this Caesar, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah. And you're in the rare position. You can look at the first three films as prequels to Conquest.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like a unique position.
My whole Planet of the Apes original 5 revolves around Conquest now.
Yeah, but in terms of great acting from Roddy McDowall, like even though the death of Montalban's character Armando is kind of abrupt, and I was like, that's a little, they could have stressed that out a little bit. Like I was like, why not have him die right in front of Caesar? And that would have really inspired his rage. But we do at least get his discovery, like learning about his father figure's death and we get that great close-up of which I don't know if we see at all in the first three movies at all, of like full on ape crying, like down the cheeks, like shaking, crying, upset. And I was like, I don't know if we've ever seen that much crying from an ape in any of the first three films. And you really feel it there. Like something bad is coming. Like,
Yeah.
he's not going to
Yeah.
just be like, oh, well, that's too bad. Like, okay. He's like, shit's going down.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it would have been cool having him just not die. And then, at the end when he's trying to make his big moment, having Montalban
Yeah.
be the kind of like, we need to stop, rather than Harry Rhodes' character McDonald. Even though I do understand what they were going for in that, being the times and being how they were trying to make the similarities between the apes and slaves and stuff like that. And so I do understand what they were going for. But it would have been interesting having Armando kind of be that like deciding factor of like, we shouldn't do that or something like that.
That would have been actually I really like that idea. It would have been even darker. Like, what if Armando was alive and right at the end, as Caesar is taking over, Armando rushes in and is like, what are you doing? You can't do this. Stop.
Yeah. This is the whole reason I kept you alive. Like, was to not do this.
Caesar just like, they exchange glances and Caesar nods at his thugs.
Yeah.
And he turns and I can see the shot, like Caesar turning around, and then you hear Armando screaming as they start killing Armando behind him, and Caesar is just so far gone. He's like,
yep.
They all have to go, and he walks up, past the camera or something. Cut to black. Like, that would have been a really powerful, terrifying ending. I don't know.
That was something they could have done then, but
I don't know. I don't know if audiences were ready for that in 72.
Yeah. I don't know if they're ready for that now. I'd love to see it, but I'm ready for it.
I love those kind of endings that just where you're like, is this happening?
Yeah.
Like, oh my God.
Is that actually what they did? No. Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot I liked about the movie. I mean, I think overall, like I would still put it, like, of the first 5 films, it's still for me probably 4th of the first 4. Like, if I had to rank them, 3 for me is above 2. 2 has some issues, which I won't go into, but like 2 is flawed, but it's still like 2 very much feels like the world of the first movie. You have a big ensemble of characters, lots of cool sets, action scenes. Charlton Heston's in it at the beginning and the end. And so it feels very much like a companion piece of the first one. The third one is this whole other thing that's set on Earth in the 70s, mostly real people, but it's really funny and quirky and clever and really entertaining until it goes really dark, right? In like the last 20, 30 minutes. And Conquest is a harder watch just because we're in one place. It's very dark. There's no humor. There's not really any compelling relationships outside of maybe Armando and Caesar. Like, the first 3 movies have at least 2 or 3 relationships that are compelling and that kind of pull you through. And this one, I feel like the new side characters weren't as interesting as the ones we get in the first 3. The girl in this one, what's her name? Lisa.
Yeah.
Kind of one note. Like, we don't learn much about her, and she doesn't really play a big role in the last act. And so it's a little shaky narratively at times. I think Roddy McDowall as Caesar pulls us through the best he can, and that makes the movie worth watching and make it interesting. And I do think the last, especially the uncut version, like the last 10, 15 minutes, is pretty spectacular. And like, I wrote down, I'm like, this is like Assault on Precinct 13, John Carpenter tone that I adore, and that like early 70s vibe of the night and this college campus and this riot happening and fire and blood and guts. And I'm like, this is really quite something for a 72 Planet of the Apes movie. So I have a lot I enjoyed about it, but I'd still, I think, rank it just slightly underneath 2, beneath the Planet of the Apes.
Yeah. I don't know how I would rank them, but I am interested to go back and actually look through and see, how this stands up. I think for myself, I did have issues with it. Like you said, I feel like the female was mentioned and it wasn't really like touched upon.
Yeah.
I feel like it was, like you said, it was very claustrophobic, which can be a good thing and can be a bad thing. I
Mhm.
think there were times it just felt too restricted
Yeah.
in what it was doing. I think narratively, as we find out now, there's a lot of blink and you miss it moments that can
Like the death of a
change
major
the whole,
character.
yeah, can change the whole thing for you. But
So yeah, I think I would give Conquest like 2.5 stars out of 4. It's not my favorite of the first 5, but there's a lot of interesting things in it. I think if you want to be completist, I feel like if my memory serves me right, the 5th one, Battle, is a little bit slower and not quite as interesting. There's a lot of interesting thematic ideas in Conquest. I would just recommend, if you watch it, to seek out the unrated cut because it's really interesting. Like for 72, what they were trying to get on the screen for a franchise that up until this one had been rated G for like kids. It's kind of amazing what the director J. Lee Thompson was trying to get away with in this 4th film.
Yeah, because I think even the 5th film, I was looking, the 5th film was rated G as well. And I know that um I know that the MPAA system was weird.
Yeah.
I know like one of the big ones is The Graduate getting a like G rating, even though there's like full naked women in that movie.
Yeah, I don't know that. So that came out the end of 67. The MPA did not start until mid 68, I want to say. So I don't think like Bonnie and Clyde and The Graduate were like the two big pushes into we need a rating system because it's hard for parents to know like what's what. So
and so so it is interesting seeing that kind of difference. I would love to see the unrated non-theatrical cut version. No, but yeah, I think I would go either. For me, I like doing letter grades. It's the teacher in me that never fully formed. I'd probably go a B minus. I think there was a little bit. I think there was a little bit of stuff they could have touched on a little bit more. I think they could have made it. I like how constrained it is, but I think they could have expanded it a little bit more as well. But it still is enjoyable. Like you said, it's very dark. It's super dark, a lot darker than I thought it was going to be. And I do think that, like we've been saying, I think Roddy McDowall is really who holds it all together.
He's just a great actor. I mean, you look at his filmography and all of his credits, as we'll get into in a second here. Like, he's just very diverse in his choices and trying different genres throughout the decades. And he's in some great horror films, and he does these science fiction films, and he's also in some like family dramas, and he just would do everything. And I really love him as an actor. I feel like he's not talked about enough now. It's partly why I do this podcast, to touch on actors and directors that nobody really talks about anymore. And that's definitely the case with Roddy McDowall. But yeah, still an interesting watch. I'm excited. We have one more to come next year, Battle. And then that'll be probably it for Planet of the Apes on Film at 50. But it's really fun to talk about Conquest. Interesting watch. If you haven't seen it, especially if like you've only seen the first one from 68 but haven't really watched the sequels, like they are worth your time. I think even the lesser ones, like I think they're worth your time. There's some interesting thematic elements going on and great performances and some really strong filmmaking, so check it out. All right,
I agree.
So that takes us to our final 2 segments. The first one, the Divine double feature, we pick a more modern film to pair with this movie. I went with kind of an obvious one. I just went with the most recent Planet of the Apes movie. Did you have anything different?
I was thinking of doing the Planet of the Apes, but I tried to think outside a little bit. Like I said, if I put it in with the most recent Planet of the Apes trilogy, I would have it lumped in between 1 and 2, I think. It's more of that kind of building of the revolt of the apes themselves. But the double feature I picked is another franchise movie that kind of feels it's set far into the future, away from the rest of the franchise. It's kind of feels like its own thing. It has its own ending, or it has its own beginning, middle, and end. It has, a man who has to protect one of the beings that is being created, and I went with Logan.
Oh, that's a great choice, Logan, with the potentially the final Hugh Jackman Wolverine. Is he ever going to do it again, or is that it?
I hope so. I hope it's the final one. That's one of the things I'm seeing. I'm seeing Doctor Strange on May 2nd.
Okay.
I guess a week before it's released. And
Oh,
I'm
cool.
hoping that Patrick Stewart, I know his voice is in it, but I know that you can just use a voice. I'm
Yeah.
hoping that neither of them are in it because Logan is one of my all-time favorites. I think it is kind of similar to Conquest to hold it back and like to put it back into itself. It is a comic book movie. It is an X-Men movie, but it feels so separated from the rest of the franchise that I kind of tend to put it as its own thing. It's
Hmm.
a lot smaller. You don't have any they're not there's battles, but there's smaller battles. They're not
Yeah.
like they're going and fighting gods and fighting stuff like that. Like they're
Hmm.
just fighting for humanity and they're fighting for like themselves and they're fighting for their own freedom away from everything that they've been a part of. And so that's why I think this pairs together pretty well. You've got the death scene in the middle of it, even though I think this
Hmm.
one's at least not a guy jumping out of a window.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think what Hugh Jackman and what Patrick Stewart were able to do is something that isn't really done ever. No one really ever gets to like decide their fate. Like
Hmm.
in the real world, like no one ever really gets to like decide how they go out,
Yeah.
decides how they like finish a character. And so I think what they did was so special. And I think um how they were able to definitively like end that part of their life
Yeah.
was the perfect ending. And that's my thing. Like, I don't care if there's another Professor X. I don't care if it's James McAvoy's. I don't care if there's another Wolverine, whoever that may be.
Hmm.
I just really hope that it's not Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart, because
Yeah.
I think what they did in Logan is something that, again, never is done, is something that should be special and should be immortalized. And I think having one more performance as them kind of leaves that lasting taste in everyone's mouth of, oh, their last performance was
Mm.
in Doctor Strange, not their last performance was in
Yeah.
Logan when they got to go out. That's
Yeah.
my hope.
That's a
I
great
doubt
point.
it. Doubt it happens. They're probably going to be in it for 5 seconds and they're probably going to say something goofy and then leave the screen forever. And everyone's going to, oh my God, they were in the movie. But I hope they're not in it.
I think, didn't I read a story like Patrick Stewart watched the screening of Logan, and didn't he and Hugh Jackman like handshake and say, "That's it. This
Yeah.
is so beautiful. This is so well done. Let's end
Yeah.
it here."
They talked about it. And every time they've talked about coming back to the character, even they asked Patrick Stewart about Doctor Strange. And he was like, if it wasn't for Logan, I would have said, like, I would say yes, and I would definitely be in it.
Hmm.
But I don't know if they're pulling the Andrew Garfield of deny, deny, deny or what. But every time they're asked about it, they say, if it wasn't for Logan, we would do it.
Mm.
So that's why I'm still holding out a little bit of hope for it, because I don't think that they would kind of play with the audience like that. The difference between that and what Andrew Garfield did was Andrew Garfield's character was still so wide open, and
Yeah.
it was still so like he hadn't been finished. Like he
Hmm.
still had so much of a story to tell,
Yeah.
and he was kind of done wrong. He did, again, that's another part where he didn't really
Hmm.
get to tell his ending.
Yeah.
Tobey Maguire never got to really tell his ending,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
they got to tell their ending. And yeah, like you were saying, I think they snuck into a screening of it, and I think Charles is Professor X's death is what really like made them tear up, and they were like, yeah, like we can't top this.
Hmm. Yeah. That movie was so great, and it was rated R, right? Like it was a hard
Yeah,
R
hard
rated,
art.
and that
Yeah.
was just cool. Like you don't see that very much. I guess the closest thing the original Planet of the Apes franchise got to that was Conquest, because it's
Mm-hmm.
more violent than the Versary. But yeah, that's a great choice. I love that. So yeah, I would just go. I feel like if you wanted to look at one more, I guess the obvious choice would be Battle, because it's the next movie in this franchise. But it would be interesting to watch any one of these first five alongside one of the three from their most recent trilogy.
Mhm.
There's such a finality to Conquest. It does kind of feel like it's the end, even though there would be one more. Like I just thought it'd be interesting to compare that to the ending of the new trilogy and just see all the similarities and differences between like the storytelling and the acting and like the evolution of film over what would that
Mhm.
have been 45 years
Yeah, pretty
between
much.
72 and 2017. So that would just be interesting for me, like especially to see that evolution of what film can be 45 years on. But yeah, I really love Logan. That's a cool choice. Thanks for that.
No
All right,
problem.
so that's our last. So that takes us to our last segment, Beyond the Flick. I thought we just talked just briefly about Roddy McDowall's career, acting from the 30s to the 90s. Have you seen him in anything outside of Conquest?
I'm well, my
So his biggest,
computer
I
won't
would say
load.
his biggest films would be he's a big part of Cleopatra from 63, the film with Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, the big epic drama from 63. And then he is in How Green Was My Valley from 41. He's a child actor. He's one of the stars of that film
Mhm.
from 41 by John Ford. That's the film that beat Citizen Kane to win the Oscar for Best
Mhm.
Picture. And then probably his later career most famous film is Fright Night from 1985, which is a horror film, a kind of a comedic horror film from the mid 80s, which is great, which is so much fun.
Yeah.
And Roddy McDowall plays like he plays a host of like a late night horror like a show that plays horror films, and he's very quirky in it, and it's like a fun performance from him in that. Those would be the big ones. He's in Bed Knobs and Broomsticks, the Disney film, but not very much. He's only in a few
Mm.
scenes. And he's a voice in A
Yeah.
Bug's Life.
Yeah, I looking through it is interesting. I see that he was in the Planet of the Apes TV series as a different role,
Oh my
which
gosh, he's
is
in the series too. I didn't even know that.
yeah, as a completely different role. He plays the character of Galen. I don't know who that is but he's apparently in all 14 episodes.
He was a
Um,
working actor, man. That guy would just like if there was a job and he thought he could make something of it, he took it.
yeah, he's in I see he plays Samwise Gamgee and I assume the animated
The
Return of the
animated
King.
version. Oh,
Mhm.
interesting. Oh, very cool.
Um, yeah, there's not really a lot that I've seen of him in. So this is not
This is
only
your
is this my
introduction.
kind of introduction to that Planet of the Apes, that's my introduction to him as an actor. So yeah, I think it was a good one. I don't know his career. I don't know how it is, but I would assume that this is probably his better performance, or at least the performance he's known for the most.
Yeah, yeah. Even though he's not like physically, you don't see his face. Like this is one of the more like lead roles I would say he's in. Like Cleopatra was maybe his most acclaimed performance, but that's a supporting role in Cleopatra. And
Mhm.
then he's not the lead of Fright Night. He's like a supporting character in that who comes into the proceedings. I want to say like he comes like he has a big part in the narrative starting in about the midpoint of the movie. I want to say he's not in a whole lot of the first half. I would also recommend he's really good in a film called Inside Daisy Clover from
Mhm.
1965. That's a drama with Natalie Wood, which I really like.
Okay.
And another horror
Love
film he's
her.
really good in is called The Legend of Hell House, which I think we're coming up to on Film at 50. It might be 73, a film I saw when I was a kid and freaked the hell out of me. And I have not seen it since I was a kid. I don't remember. Like I'm like, will it hold up now? Like, will I like it? I don't know. I just remember it really scared me when I was young. It's called The Legend of Hell House, and I
Okay.
believe it's
Interesting.
based on a Richard Matheson book, if I'm not mistaken. But excited to watch that again. And then one other title I really like him in is called Dead of Winter. This other kind of suspense thriller with Mary Steenburgen, very underrated late 80s thriller. And it's kind of claustrophobic. She's kind of like out in the dead of winter in this cabin. He's got a smaller part in that, but it's also a really strong film. But if I had to pick my top three, it'd be How Green Was My Valley. You get to see him as a child actor in 1941, the Best Picture winner of 1941. Number two would be Fright Night, and number one is the best film he's in by far for me is the original Planet of the Apes, which is my favorite, even surpassing the Matt Reeves movies. Like my favorite of all
Interesting.
of them is the first one. So I would recommend to you, you do not have to watch all five. I would recommend you find a night and watch the very first one with Charlton Heston. It's a great film.
Yeah, I might. especially watching, because this seems like, again, like I was mentioning before, this seems like the beginning of a new version of Planet of the Apes,
Yeah.
especially because like the main characters aren't in it, and this is more Caesar's story rather than,
Hmm.
I assume, Cornelius and whoever else's
Zira.
story.
Yeah.
And so it would be interesting seeing this one versus that one versus the Matt Reeves
Yeah.
and stuff like
I
that.
would love to get your take, having watched Conquest, which is very dark and humorless. It'd be interesting to hear your take on the first one, which has a
Okay.
lot more I mean, it's serious and it's playing with big ideas, but it has a little bit more lightness to it than
Mhm.
Conquest does. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll let you know when I do watch it.
That'd be fantastic. Cool. Well, it's been a lot of fun to talk to you on the show today, Jacob. As we get to the end here, I'd love for you to share, tell our audience where they can find you online, anything you'd like to promote. Now would be the time.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at tberry57. From there, I've got a link tree. It makes everything easier.
Yep.
Um, I have my site that I founded with my friend Ricky, musiccitydrivein.com. But I also write for a whole bunch of other places, and I just did my first review for In Session Film. If you
Oh, yeah, I
have
write
heard
for
of
In
them,
Session Film.
and so
That's
yeah,
cool.
so I did my first for them. And so I've got a whole bunch of different places. I am trying to work as much as I can. I and just everywhere. You can find me basically on any service at tberry57. You can find my link tree, which will take you to all of my it's basically my full writing portfolio of all my different places, all my different things that I've done. And
Cool.
so it's interesting. You know, my friends and I, we just started a new awards-based website, Oscar Central.
Ooh.
We are on Twitter at Oscars_Central. It's really fun. As my friend Kenzie would say, it's very pretty. Um, so you can go follow that as well. But yeah, I'm just working as much as I can. You can find me basically anywhere. Twitter is the easiest spot where you can find everything.
Cool. Well, we will check it out. Thanks for being here, Jacob. Thanks to all of you for listening. You can find us online at filmat50.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And also check out my new YouTube channel, Brian Rowe Video, where I'm talking about everything Oscars, Oscar history, and some videos about films and actors that I love. Until next time, remember, 50 never looked this good.